Shalom WJC family. It's time for our weekly Torah talk. This week, the Torah portion is Acharei Mot, often paired as a double portion with Kedoshim, but standing alone in this leap year, where we have a lot of extra space because we added an entire extra month for to have some of these parshiot, these Torah portions, stand alone. So, fairly rare occasion, we're reading Acharei Mot on its own. It also happens to be the time of the Yoms, right? After Passover, we, or the state of Israel, instituted these Yoms. Today, when I'm recording this, although it will come out in an email tomorrow, is Yom HaShoah, our Holocaust Remembrance Day. Next week, we'll have Yom HaZikaron, Israeli Memorial Day, and then Yom HaAtzmaut, Israeli Independence Day, on Thursday. And I think the junction of Yom HaShoah and even Yom HaZikaron and Acharei Mot is actually very important, and I want to talk a little bit about it today. Because Acharei Mot means after the death. And it refers to the beginning of the Torah portion where it says, Acharei Mot Nadav Avihu, after the death of Nadav and Avihu, Aaron's two oldest sons, who died a few weeks back in Parshat Shmini. We reported they brought a strange fire to the tabernacle and they were consumed by God and by a fire, a holy fire, and very troubling and difficult passage. Moshe tries to maybe explain it or comfort Aaron, and we're told Aaron is silent. Mysteriously, that is brought up here at the beginning of this Torah portion, many chapters later in the book of Leviticus, before we get the report of first the rules of Yom Kippur, the biblical rules of Yom Kippur, the whole avodah ceremony that we still read to this day in the liturgy of Yom Kippur Musaf, and then Kedoshim, the holiness code, how we're supposed to behave in the world to be Kodesh, to make things more Kodesh. So the question is, why Acharei Mot? Why mention the death of Aaron's sons right before we launch into the worship service of Yom Kippur and then the holiness code, how we're supposed to live a life of Kedusha? And I think exploring that gives us a little insight also into Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron, the senseless deaths, murders of millions of people in the Shoah, in the Holocaust, is a constant challenge theologically to our faith. Because we have this idea that that if we live exactly as God wants us to live, only good things will happen to us. That's sort of this theism that we inherit. And the fact is it doesn't work. We don't see that in reality. And an event like the Holocaust, but the truth is, even an event like the death of Aaron's two sons, trying to be good, we're taught they were prominent men in their time and came with passion for God and ultimately pay this terrible, terrible price. And who pays the terrible price? Also Aaron, who, just the death of his kids. And he's dedicated his whole life. He's had missteps, but his whole life to God, and everyone has missteps. So what do we do with that? What do we do with the fact that the world doesn't seem to fit that theology, that if you do everything right according to God, only right things will happen to you? Because we know the world doesn't work that way. Acharei Mot comes to tell us that that was never really the idea. Right? That the world is challenging, that there are things that happen that we just can't explain. And trying to explain them is really senseless. You can't take a tragedy on the scale of Yom HaShoah, on the scale of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, or even on the scale of what it took to rebuild the state of Israel and all who lost their lives, immigrants fleeing from the Shoah, arriving with nothing on the shores of what was then British Mandate Palestine, and immediately entering into this war of independence and losing their lives. There's just no explanation. And Acharei Mot comes along to say, right, there's not an explanation. But here's what we do. In Judaism, we don't ask the question why. We don't look for that explanation. We accept that the world that we are given is a world that, sometimes just doesn't feel just. That it doesn't work according to whatever our impressions of fairness should be. And the reason why we practice Judaism, the reason why we do the mitzvot and the things that God advised us to do is not because by doing so nothing bad will ever happen to us. No one in our family will ever get sick. No one in our family will ever die. That is just not the way the world works. That would be a false promise. We don't believe in the prosperity gospel, that if you're right with the Lord, you're going to get rich quick. That is just not how the world works. So what do? Acharei Mot. We remember those who died. We remember the gift that their lives were. And then we press on with the mitzvot. The laws of Yom Kippur are given unto us. The laws of Kedoshim, how to live our lives, how to treat other people, how to make sure our relationships remain sacred. Because the question is not why. The question is what now? Knowing we live in the world that we live in, that for reasons we cannot explain adequately, it is this way. What now? How do we live in this world, getting all the beauty we can out of life, getting all of the meaning and holiness that we can that's in this world, even amidst the mundane and the gross and the messy and the unfairness and the pain? That's what the mitzvot are ultimately about. There's a passage of Talmud that I first learned from Rabbi Harold Kushner. I recently read the Lubavitcher Rebbe quoting this same passage with regard to the Shoah. Moses is seeing mystically the end of Rabbi Akiva, who was arrested by the Romans and tortured terribly. And Moses says, this is the man's Torah and this is his end? Right? How could someone who unlocked meaning in the Torah that even Moses didn't understand, how does he end up, in this terrible tortured death? And God says, shtok, quiet, don't ask. Right? Don't ask why. And whether it's Rabbi Harold Kushner or Rabbi Schneerson or any one of us, that is good. Look, we can't help but ask why. But don't get stuck on why. Because we'll never have an adequate answer. There is no adequate answer to the Shoah. There's no adequate answer to Acharei Mot, to the death of children. So what do? We remember. We remember the culture, the beautiful culture of Eastern European Judaism that was destroyed, and we raise it up and we try and get the meaning out of it. We remember those who we have lost seemingly unfairly, and we hold them up, and even the ones that we lose after they live a long and beautiful life. But we remember the lessons of their lives, and we hold them up, and we try and find the beauty in their lives. Acharei Mot, once we remember and honor them, we move forward in the world the way it is, accepting it. And how do? We do mitzvot. We worship. We bring God into our lives through ritual and worship, like the Yom Kippur ceremony we read about in Acharei Mot. And we live our lives focusing on relationships and treating people right and raising people up, as we learn in the Holiness Code. And that's the rest of Acharei Mot and Parshat Kedoshim. And in doing so, we hope that we are able to experience more beauty and whatever limited time we have together, because to be human means that our relationships one day will end. That however much time we have together, we make it count as much as possible, that we make it as beautiful as possible, that we share the love and we share the care and we share the understanding, and we always look to pull through ritual and through how we interact with others, to pull the holiness, the sparks of holiness that are all around us, and raise them up. And when we do that, even in a world that is flawed, even in a world that has inexplicable injustice in it, we're able to move forward. We're able to sense the beauty. We're able to see the holy. And in so doing, honor the lives of those we have lost. Continue to interact with them, Acharei Mot, after the death. And ultimately, hopefully, in some way, keep them alive in spirit as we walk a path that they walked, as we continue a journey they started, ever linked to something bigger than ourselves, to something eternal, the Jewish people, and to God. May their memories be for a blessing. May we all walk forward, finding that beauty, honoring their memory in the way that we honor the world as it is, and make it better, and make it more beautiful, and make it holier in the way we follow the path laid before us in the Torah and by those who came before us.